In this video, we're going to be going over how to use alphas to create a plant inside a Modo. So the first thing we're going to do is a little bit of research. So the plant I'm going to be making for this one is going to be a fern. So I'm on textures.com. This is just a good free and paid resource for textures. And we're going to be using this one right here. But again, looking through this, there's a lot of images that we could definitely use. But looking at this one, there's 4 images in here, and they all derived from this first image. They just did some Photoshop work for us. So what we're going to use is we're probably only going to download this one right here. So again, if you have a free account, you can get the medium size, so 1066 by 1600. And if you have a paid account, you can get these larger ones. We're going to be going with probably this large one right here. We might make a 2K map, or 2048 by 2048. So if we look at this texture, it's just this same one, but instead of there being an empty background, they kind of filled it in with green. From this image, they used this one, they created the alpha, or the black and white image that would be used to cut out the geometry. So we're going to make our own. And this one down here is the origin image that all these were created from. They probably just did a color select, grabbed everything that was a shade of blue, deleted it, and got this image, and then created these 2 images from this initial one. Next thing that we're going to do is, I just jumped on Sketchfab and I just typed in the word fern. And again, there's a bunch of examples in here, some cartoony, some kind of irrelevant. I mean, there's a fern in here by the goose. But again, just having some stuff to look at. And from this, I got kind of 2 different branches, no pun intended, that we could go off of. And one was a fern and it had like a central stalk. So if we zoom in on this, the stalk is just a 6-sided cylinder that goes up and all these branches come off of it. The other kind was something like this, where the little fern branches just kind of go directly into the ground. There's no actual stalk that we would be working with. And then this one as well, another good one. And again, it was just the branches went directly down into the ground. So looking on Google, just to kind of figure out, is there the stalk or not? Kind of the general consensus, if you look at ones in the wild that aren't in a potter's plant, like this one right here is just sitting on the ground. A lot of these, this one as well, they don't have that big stalk coming up. Again, I'm not a botanist, I don't know everything about plants, but with my very rudimentary quick research, this one has a bit of a stalk, but I don't entirely know if that's a fern. With my initial research, I'm going to say they are sitting on the ground, something like this, and base my plant off of that. And again, we're not going for scientific accuracy here, so it realistically doesn't matter that much. I'm just going off the most common thing that comes up on Google Images when you type in fern plant. So we can close this and get started inside of Modo. And again, the image that I'm using, I already have it downloaded. It's the roughly 3000 by 5000 pixel one. Let's actually throw this into Photoshop and look at it real quick. So if I zoom in on this, there's kind of a few things. Let's go to the bottom first. So I'm pretty sure, yeah. Areas like right here, let's actually throw a color under here so this is easier to see. I will get something that kind of burns your eyes a little bit. So you can see all the little areas where there's going to be little holes and stuff, and some of these plants, a little hard to tell, but there's going to be actually holes in the plant themselves. So again, we're not going to be modeling every one of these leaves by any means. We're going to do this in kind of a measured approach of making it very simple and then making it more and more complicated, but we'll decide that as we get further into the project. So before I jump into Modo, I'm going to change the size of this image. So let's go to Image, Canvas Size, and it's at 3000 by 5000. We're going to make it a 4096 by 4096 or a 4K map. Hit OK. And again, it's going to say that I'm going to lose some of the image, but realistically it doesn't crop it off. So I can now change the size. So I'm going to Control T or Edit Image Size. And then I want to uniformly scale this down. So I want to hold the Shift key, left click and drag, and that'll uniformly scale it. Again, if I don't hold that Shift key, it's going to be able to stretch and squish in multiple ways. And hold Shift, left click, pull that down. So now I want to just make sure there's a little bit of padding, so I'm not going all the way to the edge, but I can get fairly close. So something like this should be fine. And again, I'll just use the arrow keys to kind of fine adjust this a little bit. So somewhere in there, hit enter. So I crowded this over to the right side of the image. Realistically, if I put it in the center, now I have a little bit of space here, a little space here, but if I move it all the way over to the right, what's going to happen is I effectively get a lot of space here. So let's say I wanted to do the bottom of all the leaves or something like that, whereas this image is just the top, or I wanted to put another plant over here. I just have a big space over here that I can wisely use this however I see fit. So we'll call this good. So file, save, and now let's jump into Modo. So since we're using a square image, what we can do is take advantage of using a square polygon. So let's just hold the shift key. This font turns into a plane. Over here it's even called plane. Now I can look at it, and again, this is just going to be a little 1 meter by 1 meter plane that we can work with. So if I was to apply my image over here, let's actually give this a material real quick. Let's call it plant, call that good. Throw this in here and go ahead and close that. So now, since I had a square image and I'm putting it on a perfectly square plane, what's going to happen is I know for a fact that this image is now in the right, it has the right proportions. And again, this works because if I go to my UVs really quick, image is already in there. This, when a plane gets dropped in, again holding the shift key and clicking right here, it's going to, the UVs for it are going to perfectly fill up the 1-to-1 UV space. That's just kind of the magic of using this plane right here. So again, just a quick time saver for you. So normally when we make assets, we'll fully model it and then unwrap it and then texture it. But since we're working with such a soon-to-be simple shape, we can actually we're almost modeling in reverse, you can think of it as. So we have this texture applied to this plane. Now we're going to modify this plane to make it feel more like geometry. And just to make things easy, we're actually going to do this in stages, and we'll number these, so after the fact we can kind of come back and look at these. So we'll name this one Fern 01, then we'll just right click and duplicate it, and this one will be Fern 02 in a sense. So let's go ahead and turn that off. When we're modeling on something that already has a texture, we just have to be really careful and make sure that the textures are visible so we can know if one of our modeling tools actually kind of screws up the texture in a way. So the first thing that I'm going to do on this guy is, again, we're working on Fern 02, is I'm going to do a loop slice, which again is under the edit tool. I'm going to be using a lot of hotkeys. So after I do the loop slice, I can slide this edge back and forth. Let's slide it to about right here. We're just trimming it fairly close, but not too close to the edge right here. And actually, it's a little bit finicky. It's snapping at 0.5% intervals. So if we need a little bit more fine adjustment, I'll show you something really cool. So if we move this over here, I obviously don't want it over here, but I drop the tool. Now if I was to just move this edge, it's actually going to stretch and squish both of these polygons as far as the UV goes. So what I want to do is have the move tool activated, and then down here I want to have slip UVs turned on. So now I should be able to move this edge without affecting the UVs at all. So now I can pull this in, I can even pull it through this, and the UVs are automatically updating with that edge. So now I can, in a sense, zoom in and fine tune this and get it wherever I want. And again, just ballpark right there is fine. So from here I'm going to switch to polygon mode, and then I'll just delete out this polygon. This is just extra space that I really don't need. And then from here I can center this. Let's manually center this. Something like this. I could even go to this top view, and if I wanted to I could even rotate this a little bit, but just to keep things easy to work with, we'll keep things square. The other thing that I could have done potentially is if I kind of look at the start point right here and the end point up here, the start point is on the right of the x-axis, the end point is on the left of the x-axis, so it might have been a good idea to rotate this image a little bit. It realistically doesn't matter though. That's just, it depends on how perfectly straight you want things to be. But again, this is a plant, it's organic. We can go with it being a little bit crooked, it's fine. So I'll actually kind of save here in a sense and duplicate and call this new one Fern 03, and then I'll just hide this old one because again I don't want to accidentally be working on these because again both are in the same spot. So turn that one off, click on this one, this is our active mesh, we're now working on Fern 3. And that being said, let's go ahead and save our scene so nothing screws up. We'll just name this Fern 01, and again this 01 here is denoting the version history of my 3D file, not what Fern I'm working on. So from this point we can start cutting out geo to make this look a little bit more realistic. Because again, if we just have a perfectly straight collection of leaves, it doesn't look all that real. So we can kind of do this in stages. And again, this, if I screw something up, I can always kind of revert back to my other version. So let's just go ahead, we'll do another loop slice. Let's actually close some of these extra menus that I'm not using. There we go. Just so I have more room for my loop slice, the active tool that I'm using, as opposed to all these tools that I'm not going to be using for right now. So we have a count of 1. For this instance, let's just set it to 3. Hit spacebar or escape to drop that tool. Now I have a bunch of horizontal slices. So from this point, I could go to the right angle, and again, bringing up these pie menus, if I hold the control and the spacebar, it lets me bring up a different 3D viewport, or I can go over here and change it to right, left, etc. So going from the right menu, go to deform. We're going to use the bend tool right here. So again, I left click to activate that tool. Let's hide the align and the scale tools just so I can see more of my bend tool. Now I'm going to hover over the 3D viewport, and then wherever I right click will be kind of my bend point, the start point. And then this little guy would be where I want the end point to be. So I want this to be moved up towards the tip, my start point to be around the start of the plant. So now let's go ahead and change perspective. So from here I can bend this plant up or down. So most likely in this case I'm going to want to bend it down. This is going to be sticking out of the ground, so after I make this bend, I could switch to the rotate tool, and now I could rotate up and put this in place. Something like this. And now I could kind of populate and make a bunch of these. So realistically, I don't like how this is straight across this way. Ideally, I'd like to have it have a little bit more detail in it. So again, that was just kind of a brief preview of what we can do. Let's go back to this Fern 2, and I'm going to copy and paste him back into Fern 3. So effectively we're starting over in a sense. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to make a slice that's going through this way, and it's going to kind of simulate this little branch right here. So grab our 2 edges, do our loop slice, we'll just set the count to 1, and now we can get this kind of position. So from here we can see that this really doesn't line up with the tip of the plant by any means. It lines up quite a bit better down here. So what we're going to do is we can use that slip UVs, bring this over to where, let's actually turn our grid off. So effectively what I'm trying to do is make it to where I have a working line about right here. So again, if I have this line select, you can see that it doesn't really line up along this portion right here. So what we can do is put in more horizontal and vertical lines, and we can make this as high poly as we want. If it's going to be a game asset, we might want it a little bit lower poly. It just depends on how you're using it. And again, that's usually a good thing, is to figure out the use case of what type of game is this going into. Is it going to be some crazy beast of a computer that it's going into, or is it going into an iPhone 6 or something older? So let's go ahead and start kind of mid-grade and work our way up. So what I'm going to do is those horizontal cuts, I actually liked those in there. Actually, I want to select all 3 edges, or have slice selected turned off, either or. So this count, let's set this to something like 4. And now let's go ahead and reposition our verts. So again, this vert right here, if I was to just grab this and move it without the slip UVs turned on, what it's going to do is it's going to warp the texture in a sense in one way or another. There's going to be some texture stretching. So what I'm going to do is kind of do these one at a time. This bottom one's good, but I'm going to use my move tool. I'm going to have slip UVs turned on. I'm just going to move this to where it's a little bit closer to the center of the plant. So reactivate our move tool after dropping it, hit slip UVs, and move over. So a quick tip to kind of speed things up. I want to select this vertice right here, but I don't want to deactivate the move tool, reactivate the move tool, and then turn slip UVs back on. That's a little quirk with slip UVs, is it turns off every single time you change tools. So what I'm going to do is I already have my move tool active. The hotkey for the move tool is W, so I'm going to hold down the W key, lasso select the vert that I want. You can see that it's selected, and I'm going to let go of the W key, and I still have the move tool active. So the one thing that I just mentioned, the slip UVs, that I have to turn back on, and then I can tweak this over. And again, there's a handful of different ways of doing this. So hold down W, lasso select, turn on slip UVs. But again, there's a handful of different ways of doing this, but we're going to be settled kind of on that one. So let's just kind of look at what we have. So let's actually put one more slice right here. And again, when I do the loop slice, it remembered I wanted 4 last time. I only want 1 this time. So let's grab this guy. And you can see where I can get as detailed or not as I want with this. So something like this. Then we can kind of continue on. So before I go any further, just because I like this as a potential stopping point, I'm going to copy N for new mesh, paste, or I could have duplicated that either or, and name this Fern 04. So again, now our kind of save state of the third version is right here, so we'll just go ahead and turn that one off, go to the fourth one. So the other thing that you're probably noticing is my horizontal lines are going perfectly horizontal, but the plants are going at a bit of an angle, so like maybe a 30-degree angle, let's say. So what I can do here is grab these edges, and I can either do these one at a time or kind of do them all at the same time. Let's do a handful at a time. So I'll grab these 3, hit W to move, slip UVs turned on, then we're going to kind of slide these up. So again, you can see that the closer you are to the bottom, the more angled it is. You get towards the top and they're a little bit more horizontal. So this might be a good one to kind of do one at a time. And the thing with this is I could, if I wanted to, I could do this really detailed, and I could make one little call out for each one of these little strands, or I can just get kind of an average going. So at first, let's just do this little average method of doing it. So slip UVs, move that up a little bit. And we'll just do this really quickly. And again, this is one of the times that if you're using slip UVs a lot, if this is something that you're kind of having fun with and you want to do a lot of plants or use this method a lot, I would recommend just setting a hotkey to that slip UVs, or setting up kind of a tool that, or a workflow that makes it to where you don't have to turn that on every time. And again, there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but for video length's sake, I'm going to skip that for now. So from here, we have a little bit better of a mesh to work with. I was to go ahead, go to our bend tool. We could bend this way, and then maybe grab these, and we could either bend these down or move them down. We get just the option of a little bit more definition here. So let's actually undo that bend. So the other thing that we might want would be cuts going this way. So right now, instead of actually just making this cut going in here and then adjusting all this, I'm going to actually change the shape over all of this to make it a little bit easier for us. So what I can do is let's actually do a new tool. So I'm going to use the edge slice tool. Again, it's under edit. And I don't think I can start here. I'm probably going to have to start right here, and then I can adjust later. But I'm going to have multi-slice turned on. That's normally turned off. And what that lets me do is cut through many things at one time. So if I click here, you can see potentially see that little blue dotted line. Now I can go up here and I can connect to this point, and that cuts all the way through. And I can do that same thing over here. Can probably maybe even start right here. Okay, so it comes out right here a little bit, so that's not going to work. So let's start right here, and then we can just adjust a little bit later. And again, with this cut, what I'm making sure is happening is I'm not kind of impeding, so you can see the dotted line. It's cutting some leaves away. I want to make sure that that dotted line doesn't cut away any of the leaves. I want to stay a pretty good distance away from stuff, so let's actually put this right here. So again, we have a quad here and a tri here at this point. Not a big deal, but now I can go ahead and delete all of those polygons. We're effectively making less negative space. And the other thing I could do with this is have the slip UVs turned on, and now I can just manipulate these one at a time. To make this space a little bit evenly. So I'll speed up the video right here, and you can just see this process a little bit faster. So you could probably see that I was struggling over here and over here a little bit. So let's address those areas. If I grab all of my edges, we have it where it bubbles out a little bit right here, and then these leaves towards the stalk are a little bit shorter, I guess you could say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just have the edge slice tool. Multi-slice doesn't really need to be on. I'm just going to do something like that. So we added one edge to work with, so hopefully this will be a little bit easier to get where this kind of bubbles out. And again, I want to make sure that I'm not cutting off this area right here or this area right here. And again, I could bring in more sections if I wanted to, but we're keeping this relatively low poly. Now this one, it's kind of holding the shape for this leaf, but I could even bring it out a little bit more. So something like that. And again, keeping a good distance around there. So the other thing that we might want to do is let's just do a cut from here to the bottom for right now, and then back up to here. And again, this is just getting rid of more of this negative space. If we wanted to, we could technically have more of this negative space cut out and make it to where more and more of these leaves are actually modeled in, but again, that kind of defeats the purpose of the project. So what we have now, let's just double check. So those are all good. I'm just double checking that. Yep, okay. All of these are quads, because again, I'm going to do a loop slice down here. So up here, we actually don't have quads. We have a tri here and a quad here. So to make this a quad, what I can do is just do our edge slice tool, cut from here to just right here, and now this little edge, go to the top view. I can pull out, and again, we're just manipulating. Oops, I want to make sure I have slip UVs turned on when I'm moving stuff. And again, technically slip UVs is off now. If I was to move this just a little bit one way or another, it's most likely not going to make a difference. The big thing would be if it triangulated the wrong way in a sense. So if you had something like this, you can see that it looks really stretched right here. It's not as stretched right here. If I go ahead and flip this triangulation, you can see this looks better, this looks worse. Triangulation sometimes matters in these cases. Oops. So something like that should be fine. So now, just a kind of a weird quirk with Moto, I have what would be a quad here and a quad here, but this is two tris. So if I was to try to remove this, what's going to happen is it gets rid of this vertex right here, and I kind of need that vertex. So a little trick to do is I'm going to grab this edge, do an edge extend, and just kind of extrude that out. This is a weird polygon that's sitting there, but it kind of preserves this vertice here. So when I remove this edge, go ahead and hit backspace, this vert stays. Now we can go ahead and remove this polygon, and this vert stays. So it's kind of a little trick for you. And again, there's other ways of doing it, but that's just a quick way. So at this point, let's go ahead, and we know that this whole section here is quads, this whole section here is quads. So I can grab two polygons, use my loop slice tool, slice selected is turned off, and I get a little bit of a cut in here. So if I look up here, this one, it's not even cutting the leaf portion. And over here, I'd really like this to be centered. So let's move this over here. These ones are all pretty close to centered. And then these ones, if they're not as close to centered, I can kind of do that thing where I just use slip UVs and I kind of move these in a little bit more. Because again, I want to just have, there we go, this edge almost running through the center so we can get the bend in here. So with this top portion, I'm really not going to worry about keeping it all quads. So let's just get this side set first. Actually, that's fine. It's pretty much close to the middle. So around this one, we can go ahead and start moving these in, get these a little bit more centered. So again, I'm not going to worry about keeping the top quad, so let's actually use our edge slice and just connect this guy right to the top up here and then down here. And then we can remove these two edges like that. So again, we're going to have two triangles at the tips, and that should be perfectly fine. So let's duplicate this and make a Fern 5. And then we'll turn this one off. So again, just going through the stages, we had our first polygon that was, again, just one big polygon. Second one we centered. Third one we sliced up in one way. Fourth one we kind of refined that slice and then added this second slice. So again, if I needed to remove that, I could hit the backspace key, it goes away. So if I need to backtrack, it'd be fairly easy. But again, we should be fine with that. So from here, what I'm going to do is I can start bending this. So again, this is going to be the top side. So I'm most likely, let's actually move this one in a little bit. And again, this fine tweaking, you can really do at any time. But regardless, I'm going to want the leaves to kind of have a bend to them like this. So again, the plant is trying to force it to grow up, and then the gravity is pulling it back down. And then the same thing here. Plant is saying go towards the sunshine, gravity saying no. So to do that, we could use the bend tool, but realistically there's not that many points. So let's actually bend this way first. So again, bend tool, right click, move this towards the tip, and pull that down. Switch to rotate, right click, and then rotate this up, something like that. So now let's go ahead and turn our grid on. I want this center of the branch, or the bottom of the branch, to be going into the ground. We're going to want this going into the ground at world center. So let's grab this and move it over. And the other thing that you can do if you want is let's go to the Create tab, hold Shift, click, and we'll get a new plane. Again, this plane, let's actually select it and give it a new material. Just call it dirt. We're just making a dirt-ish color. This is just to help with placing it. Again, you don't need to color it that way, but you definitely can if you want. So again, I don't want to do that much extra texture tweaking, so make sure that that portion is underground. And then I can grab these verts for the leaves, and I can pull those down. And the other thing is I could say that this edge right here is probably the heaviest point on here. So this one might, in a sense, go down. So the leaf shape would go from the kind of stem of the plant, would start to go up and then down. So let's actually grab these and build these up. So I know this area is going to be a little bit more delicate, so let's deselect those. Use just the green axis or the y-axis on this one. Pull this up, something like this. Now I can go in and manually grab these. And the other thing, if you're finding it a little bit hard to see where your edges are, the one thing that you could do would be make a second version of the image of this and lower its opacity. Or if I hit the O key, or if I go to this little gear up here, they both bring up that same menu. I could go to Active Mesh, and my wireframe opacity is right here. I could make this something that's a lot darker like this, so then it would potentially be easier to see those. So now at this point I don't have slip UVs on, so if I was to move this left or right, it's going to distort, but if I just move it up a little bit, it really doesn't distort the texture that much, and it changes the curve of the plant. So again, we're technically stretching the textures just a little bit, but it's really not enough to notice, and especially something being organic like a plant, if this was a little bit this way or a little bit this way, it's not really noticeable as long as you don't really move something. So the other thing that you can do that I'm a fan of is under the sculpt tools is this move brush right here. And again, I've used this in some of my other courses. Now I can just really quickly go in and make some tweaks, pull verts down, pull them up, whatever we need to do. And again, this is another one of those things, if I needed more edges here, let's say I just use the bevel tool, I can add more, make this more and more round. It just depends on how round you need it to be. But the one thing with the bevel tool, this is a kind of tapered series of polygons, so as soon as I use it, it's going to have a drastic effect up here and a minimal effect down there. Or flip over here, it looks good from this side, and then this side is completely ruined. So again, be careful with that. So maybe instead of using the bevel tool, we do a loop slice, we add an extra edge, place it where we want it, and then grab these one at a time and make them a little bit more curved. But in this case, I'm just going to keep the two edges, and technically you wouldn't even need to have two polygons down here all the way up and two polygons down here. We could even split this. Let's actually do that just for the demo. So we will start right here. Oops, make sure that that says 0. And we're just going to put a second row in here. Something like this. And again, this is just a way of showing you more modeling tools that you can use that don't really disrupt the UVs. So now I'm going to make my second one right here, kind of bridging the gap between these, and then I'll actually remove this edge right here. So grab those, hit backspace. So now I have a more gentle curve, I guess you could say. Let's do the same thing right here. So again, we're creating a triangle, and triangles aren't the end of the world by any means. You can definitely use them intelligently if you want. So something like that. You can see that it was kind of straight line up, straight line down. As soon as I grab this edge, these ones still stay at their curve, and this has a nice look to it. And again, we haven't applied the transparency map at all yet, but we can do that later. So actually, before we get too much farther populating the 3D aspects of this plant, let's actually jump into Photoshop and take a look at that, and let's start creating these textures. So what we're going to need is we're going to need some type of diffuse or an albedo map that's going to be our color map. And again, everything we're going to make from this image right here. We're also going to need that alpha or transparency map. And then in a later video, we'll go over some more advanced maps to go along with this. But first thing we're going to want to do is create the alpha map. So again, that's going to be a mostly white image where black is going to be where there's geometry, or where we want to see visible geometry. So what I'm going to do is I have this guy down here. We'll just leave him on the bottom. So this layer, I'm going to fill this in, with white. So again, I'm using hotkeys. Control backspace fills it in with the background color. Alt backspace fills it in with the foreground color. So now we have a area filled in with white. So let's do a new layer on top of that. Now what I'm going to do, let's actually hide these, is I want to select effectively every single pixel where it actually has information in it on this image. So to do that, the fastest way is I hover over the thumbnail of the image, so this little thumbnail right here, not the name of the image. What I'm going to do is hold Control, and I'm going to tap on that image itself. So you can see this starts to get that selection border. When it's zoomed out, I don't know how visible it is on the video, but pretty much anywhere where there's a selection is now filled in. So now I'm going to go to this new layer, and now I want to fill it in with the black color. Oops. I have to make sure the layer is turned on. So then I can hold the Alt key and hit backspace. Again, if you prefer, you hate hotkeys, you can just use the fill tool. So let's hold Control and hit the D key, and that will deselect what we had selected prior. And again, that white layer is turned off. So now I can zoom in on this, and I can kind of toggle back and forth and make sure that everything is filled in how I want it to be. There might be areas that you might need to touch up, but realistically for this, we're going to call this example good. The other thing you might notice is there's a little hints of blue in here because, again, going back to the beginning of the video, our original image was based by sitting on a blue backdrop. The plant was sitting on like a blue towel or cloth or something like that. So we might see a little bit of that blue showing through, but realistically, it's a close enough color to where we're not going to worry about correcting it at this time. And the other thing I want to point out is, again, I am working on a 4K image. That's just a best practices thing to do, because you can, at any time, you can make an image smaller with little detriment to the quality of the image. Again, if you make it really tiny, it'll be kind of blurry and pixelated. But realistically, you always want to take an image and make it smaller. You never want to take an image and increase its size, because again, if we need all this detail, we have it. If we're putting it onto a phone, let's say, and it needs really small textures, and we need to crop this down to a 1K texture or a 512 or a 256, just really, really small images, all these little veins and stuff will be lost, but the overall image will still, what we need will still be there. So again, it's always better to have a large image and shrink it down to a smaller image. So we're doing that, keeping this at a 4K. But if you're going through this example and you find your computer just doesn't like 4K images, maybe you have an older computer, what you can do is just knock this down to a 2K image, so 2048 by 2048, and then you should most likely be set. So from here, I'm just going to turn both of these layers on, and I'm going to save out this image. So we will call this fern_alpha. Save this as a PNG, and we'll just keep it on my desktop. So let's go ahead and apply this and see what it looks like. So we'll jump over to our shading tree. Let's bring up that image. Looks like we have this image applied twice. We'll go ahead and delete that out of there. And now instead of this fern image being on top of the plant material, I'm just going to put it right inside of the plant material. Again, the dirt material should be empty. That's just a brown material at this point. So from here, what I'm going to do is change this on the fern alpha, change this from diffuse color to, again, I've used it before, so basic channels, transparent amount. Click that. Let's just take a look and see how this looks. So I don't know how well it's coming up on the video, but there's really two things that I want to address. And the first one will zoom in quite a bit, and that's going to be this little white border that is pretty much around everywhere where there is an alpha. And the reason why this is happening, let's go back to Photoshop, zoom way in, turn off our white layer. Let's look at our green and our black layer. So I'm going to actually put the black one underneath the green one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on and off this black layer underneath. And what's happening is you can see that black appearing and disappearing, hopefully, depending on the quality of the video. Again, I can zoom in more and it'll make it, should be very apparent at this point. And the reason why this is happening is, again, if I look at, let's say, this one pixel right here, make him a nice black color. So paying attention to this pixel, if I look at it, it has about 50% opacity of green. Underneath it has 50% opacity of black. Put it together, you get your little difference in opacity. You can barely see through it. It looks like kind of a darker green at this point. So our diffuse image at this point would be this. There's really nothing underneath. So this right here would just be a 50% green pixel. What's underneath right here that's gonna show up is gonna be almost like, you can think of it like the material color. So if I go into my shading tree and I turn off the texture, our material color is currently this gray color right here, almost white. So when I turn this on, you can kind of see the difference here. So the first thing we're going to want to do is get rid of that scenario. Again, very bad to have. And the next problem that we're going to end up having is, let's jump over to the render tree. Not sure where my camera's set up. Make sure the fern is turned on. And it becomes apparent right away. And it kind of looks like this plant was laminated and we have all this plastic here. And this is where obviously the rest of our polygon is. This is going to be a really quick one we can address. So what we're going to do for right now is just go to the material right here. This is our plant material. And if I look up here, we have the specular amount that defaults to 4%. If I put this to 0%, you can see it starts to go away, but it still kind of stays. And then we have this Fresnel amount that's set to 100. So let's set this one to 0. Now you can't see any of it. So the specular amount is determining how shiny the surface is, how much it's reflecting light. And then that Fresnel is, you can kind of think of it like a fake backlight. And later in the class, we'll go over a different way of handling the specular amount using textures. But for right now, what I want you to do is just set the specular and the Fresnel amount to 0. So let's jump back to the Model tab. And what I want to address now is this light feathering of white around the border of our alpha. So just to see this better, if I was to change our material color to something like pink, now you can really see that it's just the material color coming through on our border. Let's go ahead and undo that, get it back to our original gray color. So to change this, we're going to jump into Photoshop. And what we're going to do is modify our diffuse or our color texture. So let's actually resave this out. We're just saving the PSD as fern_working. And I'll just leave that on my desktop. So at this point, I have my alpha. So let's go ahead, Control G, group this. Name it alpha group. This guy was our originally made or downloaded working fern image. So I want to keep this. What we're going to do is just duplicate it, and then I'll put the original one down there. And again, that's just in case we need it for something. And this one I'll just rename Fern. So ideally what we need to do is take our green pixels and take them from their kind of current location and move them out. And again, that's kind of in every direction. So realistically in here would be all filled with green. So effectively we're adding padding to this image. So there's a number of ways you can do this. I'll show 3, 2 of which I actually don't want you to most likely ever use. The first one is the easiest, but again, it doesn't yield the best results. And that's to just add a new layer, put it underneath, color pick a green color, and just fill the image. So this technically would work if we were back in Modo. We would have green here instead of whatever the material color was, but the green color doesn't really match the existing colors. So again, right here, we'd kind of have like a feathered light green area right here. And that's something we want to avoid. So ideally in the light green areas, like right here, we're going to want to have light green. The dark green areas, like right here, we're going to want to have dark green. So let's go ahead and delete this layer that we just made. The other way that I don't want you to do it, again, this is doable if you have a really simple image, but duplicate the image. We're going to be working on the image below. That's grabbing the smudge tool and just pulling this image out. I mean, this is the effect that we want, but if you were to try to go through and do this for this entire image, it's literally going to take you hours because, again, there's so many little leaves here. So again, don't do it that way. Let's zoom in on an area that kind of has a lot going on. Like right here, there's light colors, there's dark colors, there's little holes. So what we're actually going to do, again, this is our working version right here, is if you have a plugin that's a dilation plugin, it kind of expands everything based on its existing color, you can use that plugin. But if you don't, what you can do is the following. We're going to duplicate our image, grab the image underneath, and we're going to do a filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And again, this is going to be how far out it's going to go, but it's going to blur it overall. So we'll just leave it at, let's actually do even number 3 pixels at first. And now we're going to take that and turn that layer on and off. Let's zoom in a little bit more. So we can see that we're getting a little bit extra green coming through. So if I was to take this layer, again, this is the unblurred, this is the blurred one. Let's duplicate it. You can see that that green got a little bit stronger. So now what I'm going to do is collapse this layer on top of this one. So you can do right click and do merge down. The hotkey for that is Control E. So we're going to do that a couple times. So duplicate, Control E, duplicate, Control E. And you can only do this so many times and it's going to start, you're going to start seeing like an intense sharpening happening. So what you could do potentially is take this image and do a filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and do maybe another 3 pixels. So again, you can repeat this process as much as needed, or again, if you are familiar with actions, I have some up here, you can go ahead and make an action that does this for you. So you can see that now I'm getting a more accurate color of what's coming through, but again, there's still a little bit of detriment, and that was from the original image that was created. And you can see that's this little bit of blue that's happening. So again, that's coming from, this is our original image right here. I could technically do something like this. I got rid of it a little bit. So if I hold Control, again, I did all hotkeys just to see if it would work. So hold Control, this is our working image, and we have a backup one down here in case we screwed up. Hold Control, tap on our image. That selects our kind of feathered border. Now I'm going, actually let's leave this on because it's kind of visible. Now I'm going to do Control-Shift-I, or up here select inverse. So now I have everything but the fern selected. Now if I hit the delete key, it's going to delete what's not selected. So again, what it's actually doing is there's some things that are partially selected. So hit delete a few more times and Control-D to deselect. Now you're not seeing that. So just to kind of prove the point, I'm going to take this undoctored image up top. Now you can see the blue border, no blue border. Let's pull this back down. And let's zoom out. So now it's not as distracting, but again, we can kind of see there's a variation of colors happening. Again, lighter greens over here, darker greens over here. And again, that blurring, I can do that a little bit more intense. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this. So again, this one right here is the one that I've been blurring. So let's actually rename this just so we don't lose track. Fern blur, and this one can just be fern top. So we can't get rid of this fern top because again, if I turn this off, this image we kept blurring. So again, you can kind of see it, but if we zoom in, there's no details. Turn this one on, all that detail is there that we want. We just want a little bit of extra pixel information down here. You can do this process as many times as you need. So again, duplicate, Control-E to flatten, duplicate, Control-E to flatten. And now you can see, potentially depending on video quality, it's starting to get that, it's almost too sharp, like if you use the sharpen filter too many times. So let's undo that one time. And now I'm going to do, just on the same one, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And again, I could do more than 3 pixels. Now we're just going to do that duplicate, merge down, duplicate, merge down, duplicate, merge down. So now you can see we have a very good border across everything. And there's even, looks like there was some either like artifacting or just some missed pixels. And you can see that those really stand out once we duplicate and blur over and over again. So if you wanted to, I can come in just using the eraser tool and clean those up. But now what I'm going to do is if I was to save this image out as is, as a PNG, and it had all of this area that was, make that a little bit bigger, all this area that was alpha, technically that image is going to have a larger file size. So for our diffuse or our color image, we actually don't really want a bunch of empty pixels that are making the file size bigger. So I'm just going to fill this in with a green color. So again, kind of doing a combination of both scenarios. Find one in the middle, and again, that one even brought to our attention another area over here that I can use the eraser tool and get rid of that guy. So again, we're going to call this good, so let's save this image out. So it's Fern working. Let's actually save the PSD file, so our working file, just in case anything crashes. Go to PNG, we have Fern underscore alpha, so now let's call this Fern underscore diff. Hit OK, and now let's apply this to our 3D object. So now we have our Fern diff, we have our original Fern. Let's go ahead and turn these off. So everything is off now. Turn our alpha on first. This was the download image name, so when I turn that on, you can see the white feathering right here. Turn this off, turn this one on, you no longer have that white feathering. And again, what I can do is, let's turn all of them on. If I turn this Fern diffuse, this is the one with the padding, the one that we just saved out. If I turn this one on and off, you can see the padding is kind of toggling on and off. And ideally, we want that to not show up. So this image right here, the one that I originally downloaded, we can delete that for right now. So let's jump back to our render tab. We're already zoomed in pretty far. We'll hit render, let this do its thing. We can see there's no feathering there. You can even zoom in fairly far on this, and this is looking very, very good. So again, if you were running around in a game, most likely you're not going to stop to look at a fern, but if you were to stop and look at it, you could see, yes, this has really nice 4K detail because the texture is a 4K image, but you'll also notice there isn't that white outline or that blurring halo effect that we were getting before. So let's jump back to the model tab. So at this point we have the diffuse applied, we have the alpha applied, and at this point we only have one plant. So let's go ahead and populate a few of these. Let's do copy paste, E to rotate. I'm just going to go to the top view, and then I can right click to move my rotation widget. So I'm just going to do this and place these. Let's do probably a thing of 3. And again, the only other thing that we want to make sure that we do is we don't have that many intersections. So to prevent this, we can have some that are up a little bit higher, some that are a little bit lower, and then just rotate them a little bit. So this process, I'll speed this up and we'll make this a little bit more full and flush. So I just quickly threw those into place, but if you notice, to make my life easier, I kind of made a thing of 3 leaves, and then I would copy paste these, move them up, shrink them down, and then most likely rotate them a little bit. And the purpose of that rotation is, again, it was done a little bit sloppy, but let's go ahead and look at one of these leaves. The purpose of that rotation was to get this right here, this stem, closer to our ground plant. Ideally, you would have the stem of every one of these touching or almost touching the ground if you wanted to make sure that it felt a little bit more accurate. And again, the more that these are crowding each other, the more they're most likely going to have to rotate up to kind of compensate for that thickness. So I'll leave that placement up to you. And the other thing that we could do to address the stem touching the ground. Let's look at the UVs real quick. So what we could do is either take this image and extend the length of the stem, and if we would have pre-planned for this, we could technically move this entire plant image up a little bit and then have a little bit of an extended stem. The other thing we could do if we wanted to would be technically modify the geometry a little bit. So we have kind of a little cuts around right here, and then we could take this edge and pull it down, and we would effectively just stretch that texture. Again, not that big of a deal, and most likely it wouldn't even be noticed once you get everything in the scene at one time. Again, it gets pretty busy in there. But that's just one of those things that pre-planning or on your next plant, just think of that extra stem as a good thing to have just in case you need it. So that pretty much does it for this video. Just a quick summary. We took this image from cgtextures.com. We used it to make an alpha or a map that would cut out parts of a polygon. We added that padding to the texture, put the background on it, saved that out. So again, this would be our working diffuse, and this would be our working alpha texture. In the next video, we're going to be going over a new type of texture that will help determine how rough or smooth the surface of your model is.